challenge of the discovery of books online, not just in the ways that you are so expert in, finding a great book and championing it in a review or in a quote or a reference or a link, but also to have books appear in the right places in context because their metadata has been crossed in some unholy and brilliant way with some app or platform or moment or use case. And it's a whole lot easier if some of you, and I suspect this is the room in which at BEA more people will know what a hackathon is, know what a hackathon is. How many of you actually have heard of a hackathon? Yes, yes, yes. So it's like that, but for publishing. And what we did was 2 weeks ago, we invited the digital community together with a bunch of publishers and experts, tech folks, retailers, New York Public Library, and others, to come and spend an entire weekend, about 32 hours, taking the metadata of publishers and attacking it fresh and from the outside. We had 250 or so people there. They formed up into 31 teams. They worked for 32 hours. They all presented in these 2-minute presentations to a group of industry experts, and 6 of those teams were deemed finalists and are coming here, as Brian said, on Friday, to having refined their ideas for a week and a half, talk to tech mentors, talk to folks in publishing. 6 of those teams are coming here to pitch their solutions, the ones they came up with a week and a half ago at Alley NYC. And I urge all of you to dig in. If you want to look at our website, publishinghackathon.com, you can see and read more about those teams and about that weekend. But we're pretty excited because, not because, although I think these 6 finalist teams have come up with brilliant, interesting, surprising solutions, but also because this conversation about how a book's found online, it's not all about Google search, it's not all about Amazon, it's also about context and use case and making books appear at the right moment to folks in the right context, is a really important conversation, and I know a conversation you guys are all having. So come 3 o'clock on Friday at the downtown stage, hear these teams pitch, talk to them, and form your own opinions. Blog about it if you like. Hashtag PubHack. But mostly, as you do, continue to be part of an ever-widening and really important conversation about how books are discovered online. That's my 2.5-minute pitch. Thank you, Brian.
So before we get started, I just want to recognize the outstanding effort put forth by our conference advisory board. They continually push us in the right direction and point us to where we need to be. So I'm very thankful for them. So our conference advisory board is Mandy Bowles, Pam Van Hickoma, David Lee King, Jane Litt, Daniel Smith, and Mary Beth Wilson. Thank you very much for all your efforts. So and now we'll open the day with our opening keynote, Who Knows What Works, by Will Schwalbe. So we're thrilled to have Will back here. He was here last year as part of our author breakfast. So we got him back. He had great impressions of the event, so we're really excited to have Will here. Will worked in publishing for 21 years, most recently as editor-in-chief at Hyperion. He also works in digital media as founder and CEO of Cookster, and Will is a journalist as well. His latest book is the New York Times bestseller, The End of Your Life Book Club. People, please welcome Will Schwalbe.
I don't know if you know this quote, but someone told me that writers are machines for turning coffee into words. Good morning. It was exactly 1 year ago that I had the pleasure of being a guest author at this blogger conference. And I got to meet some of you, and I see some familiar faces as I went from table to table to table. And now I'm back. In the meantime, I published the book that I was bending your ear about. And I'm grateful to say it exceeded all of the expectations I ever could have dreamed for it. Now, I'm using the word grateful on purpose because I owe book bloggers more thanks than I can ever say. I'm convinced that your support had a huge amount to do with the book to my publisher. I'm mentioning it because one of the countless things Keynote did brilliantly was recognize the pivotal role that book bloggers now play in the book ecology. For many authors, Amazon rankings are their crack. For me, it's Google blog search alert. Every time I see one of those little babies pop up in my inbox, I have to stop whatever I'm doing because it means that one of you has written something about the book that I wrote. And I was constantly blown away by the thoughtfulness, the seriousness, and the engagement, not just from you, but from the communities that you've brought together around books. And I do have to say, I checked the Google blog search alert this morning, and got, I think, the single coolest thing I've had to date, which is over the course of my book, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. I mentioned 107 different books, and a book blogger, Morgan's Musings, is going to read all 107 of those books. I'm very excited about that. So I just wanted to start by saying, if you ever encounter anyone who thinks that book bloggers don't move the needle in an enormous way, send them right to me, because I will straighten them out. So before I say any more words, the two words that come to mind are thank you. But it's a thank you not just on my behalf, but it's a thank you on behalf of publishers and writers and readers everywhere, because you've stepped into a void, and by your hard work and passion, you've helped millions of readers connect with books. And more than that, I do not think it's an overstatement to say that you've helped save the entire book business. So, well, thanks for that. As you just heard from the introduction, I worked in book publishing for 21 years. I was editor-in-chief of William Morrow and then editor-in-chief of Hyperion Books. And I got to publish all different kinds of books, fiction and nonfiction and cooking and business, literary and commercial, and I just loved it. But then I became fascinated with the digital world. It was partially through publishing a book called The Long Tail by Chris Anderson. Chris at the time was the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine. And so, quite impulsively, in January 2008, I quit my job and decided to become a web-entrepreneur and founded a website called Cookster.com. And what Cookster does is it brings together cookbook recipes from hundreds of the world's best chefs and cookbook authors and makes them available for free on the web. At the same time as I was launching this venture, my life would change in another very significant way. My mother, then 73 at the time, was diagnosed with stage 4B pancreatic cancer. And that means that it's pancreatic cancer that has already spread to other organs. This is the most lethal of all forms of cancer, and many people die within 3 to 6 months. My mother lived for 2 years. And over the course of those last 2 years, my brother, my sister, my father, and I all took turns going with her to her various doctor's appointments, and to chemo, and to tests. And as it turned out, I very often went with her to chemo. And we sat there 1 hour to 7 hours, and we did what we had done all our lives. We talked. And what we talked about was books. I had always been in the habit of saying to my mother, "What are you reading?" And she was always in the habit of asking the same question of me. We talked about books of all different kinds. Mysteries, cookbooks of course, but not too much, literary fiction, nonfiction. And we talked a lot about children's books too. The books that my mother had read to me when I was a kid in the early 60s, and the books that she had read to her and had read when she was growing up in the 1940s. And almost immediately, I realized that what we had done was created a very special little book club, one with only 2 members. And when this first occurred to me, I said, "You know, Mom, if we keep meeting like this at your chemo and talking about books, it's kind of like a book club." And her initial reaction was, "Don't be silly, it can't be a book club." And I said, "Why can't it be a book club?" And she said, "There's no food." So I said, okay, it will be the world's only foodless book club, and the End of Your Life Book Club was born. My mother had been an educator when I was growing up. It's important you know a little bit about her for context. And then she became a refugee advocate. And she traveled all over the world as the founding director of what is now known as the Women's Refugee Commission. This brought her to all sorts of places, frequently during wartime. It brought her to Bosnia, to Liberia, to Darfur, Burma, East Timor, and 10 times to Pakistan and Afghanistan, often to the tribal regions. She once spent a night in the tribal region of Afghanistan and had to share a guest house with 23 Mujahideen warriors. And I later said to her, "Were you scared?" And she said, "No, but they were terrified of me." Everywhere Mom went, in every refugee camp, she always heard the same word: books. That's what refugees want more than almost anything. With books, there was hope. Without books, none. So at the center of my book are books. My mother taught me many things, but one of them is this: that reading isn't the opposite of doing. Reading is the opposite of dying. That books are how we take part in the human conversation. That books are a language to discuss the things most difficult to discuss and most important. And that books in whatever form, electronic, even though that wasn't for her, or printed or audio, are how we all know what we need to do in life and in the world. When I was growing up, my mother would never say, "Why don't you put down that book and do something?" Reading was doing something, and it was something huge. So everyone here is engaged in something huge. I'm sure there are aggravating days, and there are frustrating days, and there are days when you don't feel like writing, and there are days when you don't feel like turning on the computer, but I hope the knowledge that you're engaged in something huge is a big comfort in those times. I'm kind of guessing it is, because if it wasn't, I think most of you would not be here this morning. Certainly not at this ungodly hour. So when they asked me what I wanted to talk about today, the topic that instantly popped into my head was this one: who knows what works? Now, I put a question mark at the end, because there is no punctuation mark for a shrug. But in fact, there's tons of information on the internet and in books about what works on the web, for authors, for publishers. But it occurred to me that you really shouldn't and can't talk about what works until you define what works. That is, how do we all define success? How do book bloggers define success? How do publishers define success? How do authors define success? And how do readers define success? So I decided to spend the months between when I said sure and the months when I'm here standing to try to figure this all out. Try to figure out what the meaning of what works is. And also to try to figure out, do we all share the same definition of what works? And the answer to that question is super easy: no, we don't. Or at least not always. We often, it seems, have very different ideas about the goals, and that's what so frequently leads to friction. It's also what keeps things exciting. So let's start with publishers. Now, you could say that by and large, publishers define what works in terms of sales. That's not a bad thing. If a publisher says, "That book really worked," very often what the publisher means is, that book sold a heck of a lot of copies. Why this isn't a bad thing at all is because publisher, by the very nature of the word, means someone who wants to get books out into the world. I used to say to people that if you really believe books are precious items to be clutched close to your chest and hidden from other readers, you shouldn't be a publisher, you should be a private. Though I do know that sometimes it seems that's how publishers behave. But really, as a publisher, the more books that sell, the better you're doing. It's that simple. But here's where it gets a little more complicated, because publishing houses are filled with people who have a very different definition of success sometimes. The types of people who very often go into publishing love books the same way that you love books. And sometimes it's not the books that sell the most that make them the proudest. It's the books that make a difference in people's lives and in the world. So in short, while publishers measure success is how many copies did the book sell, the people who work in publishing very often have a different measure of success, and it's one that we all share. Now on to authors. How do authors define success? Well, that's in many different ways. Somerset Maugham famously, and maybe apocryphally, said when asked why he wrote, partly to make money and partly to win the respect of those I admire. And I think that's a pretty interesting breakdown. Most authors do want their books to sell, but some care far more about, say, reviews. Some care far more about how the book is regarded by their peers. Some look to books to connect them with a community of readers, and some are horrified by that thought and look for books to separate them from other people. In short, there are as many definitions of success as there are authors, but I would say that most authors do share with book bloggers and those people in publishing the desire to make a difference in the lives of some people. There's a story that I love that has to do with George Bernard Shaw. This is a counterexample. And at the time, Samuel Goldwyn, the movie mogul, was trying to buy the rights to several of his plays to make them into movies. And the bargaining went on and on and on. And at the end, George Bernard Shaw called off the deal. And he said to Samuel Goldwyn, "The trouble is, Mr. Goldwyn, you are interested only in art, and I am interested only in money." So on to book bloggers. How do you all define success? Is it the number of visitors? Is it page views? Is it time on site? I decided to call three wonderful book bloggers who are members of the committee who set this up, Jane Litt, Mandy Bowles, and Danielle Smith. And of course, before calling them, I spent wonderful hours on their blogs, which I've continued to do so to this day. I should add that the amount of incredibly engaging material on books that exists on the web, thanks to all of you, is why the proposal for my new book remains, in the wonderful words of Natasha Bedingfield, still unwritten. So I called them and I asked them lots of things, and they told me great information, were very generous chatting with me. And they all had slightly different answers to the question of how they define success. And I won't try to tell you each individual answer. You'll have to find them and interrogate them yourselves. But what I learned from them collectively, as well from other book bloggers I know, is that this: a strong community, engagement, affirmation, access, influence were all important markers of success. But while stats can be important, they aren't everything or even the main thing. But at the end of the day, it isn't traffic or page views or number of comments. It's making a difference in the lives of readers. I should add that I had a very funny conversation with one of them on the issue of number of comments, and she was telling me that the more comments you get is not always a good thing, and as way of illustration, she sent me an endless chain over a major dispute that erupted a couple weeks ago, and I got a headache just from looking at it. So how do readers define success? Well, when I think of that question, which is the ultimate question, I think of one of the lessons my father taught me. My father had gone to business school, and one of the things that he remembered most was a professor who asked the class on the first day this question: why do people buy quarter-inch drill bits? And the teacher waited for the answer. Most people couldn't figure it out. And then he said, the answer is pretty simple. They buy quarter-inch drill bits because they want quarter-inch holes. Now, so it is, I believe, with readers. Why do they buy books or borrow books? Well, the reason is they're looking for the book to do something for them. It's not that they need to have that item just to have that item, although in the case of coffee table books, perhaps it is. But in every other kind of books, it's because they want to be entertained, or they want to escape, or they want to learn something, or they want to feel that they're not alone in the world, or they want to get the perspective of somebody very different from them, or they want to connect with other people who have read that book. They buy books because they hope that book will do something for them, will make a difference in their life in some way, big or small. So we really are all on the same page. We all want to make a difference in people's lives, but it doesn't always feel that way. So what I want to do with you now is share some thoughts on what I think we all can do to pursue our separate passions, travel down our separate paths, but wind up on the same page. I'm a list maker, so I make lists, and to my mind, there are 6 things we need to remember. Here's the first. If the book wins, we all win. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is the book, the words on the page or the screen, or the words read by an audio reader, exist outside of the author. They exist outside of the publisher. They exist outside of the blogger or the reviewer or the reader. A book is words. A book isn't the price the publisher set for it. A book is not the jacket that someone put on it. A book is not the words someone in the publishing house used to describe it. Nor is a book whether the author is gracious or rude, or whether someone in a publisher is arrogant or smart. The book is words on a page. To give you an example of the type of instance where this is forgotten, I was very sad recently to see a book written by a wonderful writer who spent 10 years writing this magnificent work. It's a very important book. And this is a comment about Amazon reviewers. This is not a comment about book bloggers. But I went to the Amazon review page to see how this book was doing, and it was filled with 1-star reviews. Filled. And they all said the same thing. The Kindle price is too high. And I thought that was heartbreaking. So I think one of the things that we all need to remember is that for readers, for authors, for all of us, if the book wins, we all win. The greatest thing that exists is that book that you love, that you come across sometimes without any context, or that you come across with truly helpful context. And it breaks my heart to think of the books that I have missed because I let the noise get in the way of the signal. Now, authors, though, very often forget this: if the book wins, we all win. And I'll give you an example. One of the greatest gifts you can give an author is editing. And I very often see reviews that say, this would have been such a good book if only it had been edited. Well, the fact of the matter is, very often it was edited, but the author rejected the edits. And of course, a reviewer can't say, this would have been a great book had it been edited, or perhaps it was edited and the author didn't take the edits. But again, authors need to get out of their own way, and they have to realize what a gift editing is, and remember, it's not them, it's not their ego, it's the book. Now, many of the bloggers I spoke to prior to coming up with this speech said the same thing, and I think it's a great sentiment. They said, we owe the publisher nothing, we owe the author nothing, but we owe readers everything. So I think the best thing that we can do for our readers is help them separate the signal from the noise. Help them see through everything that exists to the quality on the page. And it also bears mentioning that one of the great things about remembering when the book wins, we all win, is that any book can win. I think one of the most amazing things that you all do, and that the book blogging community does, is you cast a very wide net. That what you have done is liberated readers from this artificial tyranny that existed between publishers, retailers, and newspaper reviewers, where all the attention was only on the front list, and where any book that was more than 1 month old was toast. So the books that can win can be books from years ago. They can be books from independent presses. They can be self-published books. They can be Big Six books. They can be any books. Second, success is not numbers. This is something that we really need to remind publishers. And I want to illustrate it with the story of one of my most successful books ever. Over the course of 21 years in publishing, I published a lot of books, and some of them sold literally millions of copies. But when I look back on the 10 most successful books I ever published, there's one book that comes to mind, and it's always in the top 10. And it's called The Dragon Hunt. And it's a book of short stories by a Vietnamese writer named Dun Vu. And Dun Vu escaped from Vietnam with his older brother by boat, and he came to live in Paris, and he worked in IT, and he wrote these short stories. They are as bleak and devastating as any short stories you will ever read. And I published this with enormous hope and belief, and we sold 500 copies, which for a Big Six publisher is an unmitigated disaster. So years go by, and I'm visiting a friend in his little apartment. And in his little apartment, he has a little bookshelf. And on the little bookshelf, there are 15 books. And I look, and there's The Dragon Hunt. And I say, OMG, well, actually, The Dragon Hunt. And he said, that book is the most important book I've ever read. That book changed my life. That before that book, I didn't think there was anyone who saw the world the same way that I saw the world. And wherever I go, even if it's only for a weekend trip, I take that book with me. So what I want to say is, tell me that that isn't the most successful book I ever published. I also want to share a story that happened at my recent book tour, which is a different kind of story about success. I was on my way to a book signing at a wonderful bookstore outside of Chicago. And when publishers send authors around, they often have what they call media escorts, who are people who book media and take you around and really know the local book scene. So a wonderful media escort named Bill Young was taking me around. Oh, by the way, I used to love to call friends and say, I'm at the airport and the publisher sent an escort to meet me. We were about to pull into a bookstore, and he said, Will, the only thing worse than nobody showing up at your book signing? I'm like, Bill, tell me, what is the only thing worse than no one showing up at your book signing? And he said, it's one person showing up at your book signing, because he can't leave. So I walk into the bookstore. There's 50 chairs, and there's one person. And I say, under my breath, damn you, Bill, you jinxed me. And I sat down next to her, and the first words out of her mouth were, my husband's in the Apple store, he'll be back in an hour. Oh man, not only can I not leave, I can't leave for an hour. But I had the most extraordinary conversation with this woman. She was fascinating, she was terrific, she was a reader like I am, we talked about books. We had a great time. Now, I would love to tell you, for the sake of this conference and the sake of a good story, that she was a book blogger, but she wasn't. But what she was someone who belonged to a book group at her workplace. She was somebody with several hundred Facebook friends, and she was someone who tweeted. And we engaged deeply, and she became a champion of the book. And so when I talk about success is not numbers, what is my most successful of all my book signings? I'd have to put that one pretty close to the top of the list. And there's one more illustration of this, and it comes from Cookster, my website, which is, we have a gorgeous bunch of users. I love our users. I love them. And they're highly engaged, and they come back a lot, and they spend a lot of time on our site, and they open our newsletters, and they click through to things. We do a fair amount of perfectly smart, run-of-the-mill SEO, but we don't do any search engine marketing. And one of the reasons is I've never been able to figure out how to do it without getting garbage traffic. That would I love twice as many users? You bet I would, but not at the cost of getting users who are unengaged, who bounce, who leave vicious comments, and who aren't our people. So success for Cookster is highly engaged users, not number of users. numbers are really just numbers. And I think about that a lot because a lot of people urge me to do slideshows and top 10 lists and all sorts of, write about the Kardashians, any number of things that will bring in traffic. But my goal is traffic, but not at the cost of quality. Now, the third thing, remember there were six, is we all make mistakes. And so the third thing is we all need to cut each other more slack. We do stupid things, we say intemperate things, and we do it a whole lot on the web. I want to tell you a quick story about forgiveness and the role that it can play in a tense situation. And this actually comes from my early days in publishing. I was publishing a book about Princess Grace of Monaco. And there was a photo section. And there was a lovely photo in which Jack Kelly, Grace's father, was standing like this, and he was kissing her on the top of the head. And the caption said, Jack Kelly adored his daughter Grace and was devastated when she left for Monaco to marry the prince. Now here's what went wrong. When we printed the book, instead of the photo being vertical, it was horizontal. So the photo was Jack Kelly lying on top of his daughter with the caption, as you recall, Jack Kelly adored his daughter Grace and was devastated when she left for Monaco to marry the prince. Of course, who discovered this? The author. She called me up and she lit into me. I mean, it was both barrels blazing. I have never been screamed at like that. And then there was a pause, and then she burst out laughing. And after she stopped laughing, she said, well, you have to admit, it's pretty funny. So I think of this author a lot when I'm on the web and think, what a gift that was to me as a young editor, and it's a gift that we have in the power to give each other. The fourth thing, though, to keep in mind is that just because we should all cut each other some slack doesn't mean that we should all cut each other too much slack. And this has to do with how we police, I think, our own behavior on the web. One of the things that I think is important for all reviewers to bear in mind, and it's a remarkably controversial issue, is the extent to which snarkiness, cruelty, and really savage reviews belong on the web. Now, talking about what works, what gets traffic, it is beyond a shadow of a doubt that stuff gets traffic. And I am not proud of the fact that when the New York Times slammed Guy Fieri's Times Square restaurant, I read it and I even forwarded it to friends because it was pretty darn entertaining. But what I hope everybody will keep in mind, and I'm not saying that we don't all owe our readers complete honesty and truthfulness, but I hope what people will keep in mind is the human beings behind these books. There is a Nobel Prize laureate in literature who was once asked whether he remembered the names of the people who had given him bad reviews. And he said, I don't just remember those names, they are etched in acid on my heart. And that was a Nobel Prize winner. Which leads me to the fifth thing, which is kindness rocks, and communities built around kindness really rock. And so many of you have built these amazing communities, and that is something to be so proud of. And when I spend time on book blogs, and I get to see the way that you bring books to people's attention, and to see the comments, and the way that books connect with people, and the way that they find each other, thanks to you, and the way that they find that book that means as much to them as the dragon hunt meant to that friend. That is something really to be proud of. And that sense of belonging, of course, doesn't just apply to the commenters, and it applies to the lurkers, too. It applies to everybody who comes across places where they see people interact with each other. And it's a glorious thing. It's one of the best things the web has to offer. TechCrunch just did an interesting interview with a very successful new company. It's a fitness company that has made amazing strides in the gamification of fitness and the idea of having it be a little game that you play against yourself and badges and awards and all of that kind of stuff. But the CEO said, you know, the gamification isn't our secret sauce. He said, that's just what brings people in the door. Why they stay is we're building a sense of community. And when people help and support each other, they achieve their fitness goals. As I said, unkindness unfortunately works on the web, but I really believe kindness does too. Now, the sixth thing to remember, and remember there were only 6, so the end is nigh, is that books really do matter. That's where I started. That exploring books and writing about books and helping people find books is really an amazing way to spend your life. You're all awesome, and I am truly honored to be here speaking with you. In the description of what I was going to talk about, I promised some thoughts on how book bloggers would fit into the future publishing ecosystem. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that book bloggers will become increasingly important, and it's because of a very simple word, and that word is discovery. That there is too much out there, and there's not going to be less out there next year, and less out there the year before, and the year after that, and after that. There's going to be more and more and more. And that business of separating the wheat from the chaff, the signal from the noise, helping readers find books, is going to be, I think, the direction the industry goes, and that there will be more and more interplay and more dialogue between book bloggers, writers, and publishers. I was very interested to hear from a couple of the bloggers I spoke to that one of the signs of success, one of the signs of what works, I'm sure this isn't true for all of you, but is when the author makes contact through the blog with the readers. And how can that not increasingly be an incredibly important part of the ecosystem? So having exhausted my 6 points, I'm going to leave you with the story of a crusade, and then I'm going to share with you one of my favorite poems, which I think is very relevant to what we all do. So first, the story of the crusade. I've been on the road for my hardcover since October, and I head out for the paperback tour next week. But I'm not just on a tour. I'm on a crusade. Let me describe it to you. We all ask each other a ton of questions. Things like, how did you sleep? What did you have for dinner? Did you just cut in front of me in line? Are you going to eat that? But I want us all to start asking each other one particular question a whole lot more often, and it's this one. What are you reading? Now, I know that's a question you ask yourselves, and you ask each other all the time, but I want everybody to ask it of everybody all the time. I want to ask it of the person who's driving me in a taxi. I want to ask the person standing next to me in a line. I want to say to everybody, what are you reading? And I want them to turn to other people and say, what are you reading? It's a very simple question, but it's a very powerful one, and I really believe it can change lives. Because as soon as we ask that question of each other, we realize that in some sense, we are all on the same page. We have things to learn from each other, things to share with each other. I think one of the best messages I received about my book came from a woman who wrote me, and she just read it. And she was a grandmother, and as many grandmothers do, she lived in Florida. And her grandson did not. And she described to me the following exchange. She said that when she calls her grandson, she says, what are you doing? And he says, nothing. What are you watching? Television. What did you eat? Dinner. Where are you going? Out. And she decided one day to ask him, what are you reading? And there was a pause. And he said, The Hunger Games. So what she did is she went to her local bookseller and she bought The Hunger Games. And she started reading it. And the next time they got on the phone, they talked about The Hunger Games. And they were no longer a grandmother and a grandson. They were 2 readers embarked on a journey. Readers who couldn't wait to figure out what would happen next. And did Katniss really do that? And why do you think this and that? And she said that one simple question, what are you reading, transformed her relationship with her grandson. Now, the reason I called my book The End of Your Life Book Club is because I really wanted to convey this, that this was something I learned from my mother. We're all in end of our life book clubs. We're in them from the day we're born. That no one knows what's the last book you'll ever read, what's the last conversation about a book you'll ever have. So the book really is a plea to people. Let's make these count. Let's make our reading count. Let's make our conversations count. You don't have to wait till someone you love has a death sentence from pancreatic cancer to start reading and engaging fully over books. My mother never wavered from her conviction that books are the most powerful tool in the human arsenal, and that reading all kinds of books in whatever format you choose really is how you take part in the human conversation. Now, I'm going to end, more or less on time, with a poem. Whenever I'm stuck writing, I read this poem. So I know you all may be looking for inspiration with your writing and reviewing, and I hope this poem serves the same kind of inspiration for you as it has for me. Well, actually, to be honest, it's not a poem, it's a song. But don't worry, I'm not going to sing it. I don't know if anyone remembers the way Rex Harrison used to recite songs and pretend to sing it, but that's what I'm going to do. Here's the poem. Staring at the blank page before you, open up the dirty window. Let the sun illuminate the words you could not find. Reaching for something in the distance, so close you can almost taste it, release your inhibitions. Feel the rain on your skin. No one else can feel it for you. Only you can let it in. No one else can speak the words on your lips. Drench yourself in words unspoken. Live your life with arms wide open. Today is where your book begins. The rest is still unwritten. Thank you.